Welcome to the Eye Opener. I'm your host, Michael Lewis. This is a crucial week for the U.S. elections. Georgia's U.S. Senate runoff is today, and Congress will certify the presidential election results tomorrow. Both events significantly impact the future developments and what's to come. Let's first talk about the election in Georgia. As you know, there are 100 seats in the U.S. Senate. As of January 4th, the Republicans lead the Democrats with 50 to 48 seats. There are 2 seats still open. Those 2 will determine whether the Republicans can be the majority party. That's including the Republican in name only, the Rhinos, in the Senate. If you take them out, then those 2 seats from Georgia would be especially important. That is, the Georgia election will likely determine which parties will preside over the Senate for the next 2 years. Now, the White House presidency contestation is in full swing. If the Republicans fail in the Senate, the pressure will be even heavier later on. As we know, the 2 open seats are all from Georgia. This state has the most controversial elections votes. The state's contenders for these 2 federal Senate seats are also interesting. Looking at the public statements to date, Republican David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler are both presidential Trump supporters. They believe that they are combating the invasion of socialist ideology, and their victories would be most important to America. It means that they are clearly anti-socialist, which is exactly what President Trump needs. In an interview on December 28th, Perdue said that he and Loeffler were the last defense line. They are fighting against the Democrats' attack and the radical socialist agenda. Conversely, their opponents, Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, are typically far-left Democrats. People view them as followers of socialism. Ossoff actually encouraged his Twitter followers to follow the CCP Xinhua news back in 2012. Some from the Republican Party even accused him of hiding private company business ties with the Chinese Communist Party. Warnock is actually no better. After the former Cuban leader Castro passed away in 2016, in a church in the United States, Warnock asked the public to pray for the Cuban people and remember Castro. He said that Castro's legacy was complicated. He stated, "Don't let anyone tell you simple story. Life usually isn't very simple." The bipartisan race in Georgia is focusing on these 4 people with clear political stance. On January 4th, both President Trump and Biden went to Georgia to build up momentum to their respective parties' races. Biden was in Atlanta, Georgia in the afternoon of January 4th to campaign for the Democrats. President Trump's campaign in Georgia was in the evening in Dalton, a city northwest of Georgia City with a high concentration of Republican voters. Early voting for the Senate has taken place in Georgia before the official vote. It's just like the 2020 presidential election. According to Georgia election officials, as of early January 4th, more than 3 million people had voted early. That represents 39.3% of all registered voters in Georgia. It was well over half of the 4.9 million Georgia residents who voted in the 2020 presidential election. The early voting results are not in yet, but Democrats said they are optimistic. According to preliminary statistics, they found more early African American voters in Georgia than in the 2020 presidential election. Now, as a rule of thumb, African American voters are an important voting source for the Democrats in Georgia. But as we know, the state had serious problems in the presidential election, so there are still some concerns about corrupt officials cheating in this Senate runoff. As seen in the presidential race, it's expected that more Democratic voters will vote early, but on the day of the official vote, more Republican voters will go to the polls to vote directly. That will determine the final outcome. According to the Republican analysts, President Trump's pre-election campaign will be a powerful way to motivate voters to vote and will be very helpful to the 2 Republicans. Also, President Trump's campaign in Georgia is another opportunity to help not only the senators, but also for himself to speak directly to the public in his quest for election integrity. On January 2nd, President Trump personally called Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger, who is at the heart of the Georgia ballot controversy. The call lasted about 40 minutes, and during the call, President Trump called on Raffensperger to identify the problematic ballots in order to defend election integrity and achieve a fair outcome. At the same time, President Trump listed a variety of voting problems in Georgia, which also existed in other key states, such as repeat votings, private votings, and the shredding of President Trump's votes. But on the phone, Raffensperger kept refuting President Trump's various claims, insisting that President Trump's claims were proven to be false after investigation. Later, Raffensperger allegedly leaked recordings of President Trump's conversations with him to the leftist media with no good intent. On January 3rd, the Washington Post publicly reported a recording of the call between President Trump and Raffensperger that had been edited to a length of about 4.5 minutes. The Biden team said the recording was irrefutable proof of President pressuring and threatening an official of his own party to get them to rescind a state lawful certified vote count and fabricate another one in its place. While House Democrat Congressman Ted Lieu of California and Congresswoman Kathleen Rice of New York asked the FBI to launch a criminal investigation into the president. Some leftists even described the call as another Watergate scandal. But Raffensperger's actions clearly violate Georgia's own laws, which deems it illegal to record any private conversation without the consent of the other party. Raffensperger not only recorded the call, but also made it public. I honestly didn't think there was such a corrupt official in the U.S. who had no bottom line. In fact, when President Trump spoke to him, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, Trump's legal team attorney Cleta Mitchell, and Raffensperger's attorney were all on the line. So this was an official conversation, not just some spontaneous phone call. President Trump's team of professional lawyers were also on the line. One important reason is to ensure that the content of the call is not illegal so that the left can't get a hold of it. The left's use of this call is just another example of political harassment and political persecution towards President Trump. So after the recording was made public, President Trump's team questioned why the leftist media only published 4.5 minutes of the recording, and where was the other 35 minutes? If the entire conversation was played, everyone would find out that Raffensperger was a hypocrite. All the things President Trump pointed out were Raffensperger's dereliction of duty, that the people who are running Georgia's election officials are incapable, and President Trump is the one who won Georgia. The Trump team has filed 2 lawsuits against Raffensperger. One is at the federal level and the other is at the state level for unauthorized recording and leaking of the confidential litigation call. These are the events surrounding the state of Georgia. After Georgia's U.S. Senate election on January 5th, the national global spotlight will be squarely on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., where the results of the 2020 presidential election will be certified. Clearly, there are variables in this controversial certification. As we all know from our previous programs, about 140 people from the House of Representatives have formally announced that they will be participating or planning to participate in challenging the election results. At least 12 senators, including Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, have also indicated their willingness to challenge the results. The numbers are actually quite impressive. But those people who are defending the election's integrity can't sit back and relax because there are still at least 2 problems in Congress for the Republican Party. The first problem is the Republicans in both houses of Congress who officially announced that they are or are planning to reject the election results on January 6 are still debating which states to challenge. As of the recording of this show, it has not yet been confirmed which states will do so, but we know for sure that they will challenge at least one key state. If that is the case, then this action can only be symbolic. As we all know, according to the so-called election results, Joe Biden has 306 votes and President Trump has 232 votes. Joe Biden exceeds the 270 vote threshold by 36 votes, ahead of President Trump by 74 votes. The most important factor in the 270 vote threshold. As of now, no key state has 36 votes. The most is 20 votes in Pennsylvania, followed by 16 votes in Georgia, and additional votes from states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, and Nevada. The total of these votes can keep Biden's total votes down to below 270 and trigger a fundamental challenge to the election results. Challenging any single state will not achieve the objective. Now, that is just the first problem. The second problem is the January 6th congressional battle has led to a showdown moment within the Congressional Republican Party. It is unprecedented in the 4 years that President Trump has been in office. The Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has been criticized by many Americans for publicly expressing that he does not support the challenge. He even worked with Nancy Pelosi to stop the objection process. But you know what? In the past 4 years, Mitch McConnell has often sided with President Trump on all major issues. Before President Obama took office, he led the Republican Party in the Senate and played a relatively effective role in buffering and opposing leftist political agenda. Unfortunately, at this critical moment, he has become an obstacle for President Trump. He could be corrupt and degenerate. Could that be his true nature? In this most critical moment for President Trump, the United States, and even the whole world, the choices made will carry lasting impact for the future. Mitch McConnell, in fact, can be considered a pioneer of the Republican Party. He is a longtime official in Washington, D.C. Now, on the other end, a relatively young President Trump supporter, Republican U.S. Senator Tom Cotton, unexpectedly opposed the challenge to this election result. Now, I'm very surprised. He also issued a statement explaining the reasons for why he's doing this. His explanation does represent some Republican legislators' perceptions. This is the rough idea of the statement issued by Tom Cotton. He said, "The Congress chooses the president on behalf of the people. It has taken away the power of the people to choose a president. This action is essentially ending the traditional presidential election and placing the power to decide the president in the hands of partisan Congress. As a result, the Democrats will follow suit and will use this federal power to decide president to the extreme. The emboldening Democrats who want to erode the American Constitution will become even more audacious. He is therefore opposed to challenging the election results in Congress. If Republican Party members such as Tom Cotton have no problems with the bottom line, then I think he has become pedantic to defend the system. Yes, many people who love America may have great affection for this system that has lasted for more than 200 years and do not want to see it destroyed. So why did the Founding Fathers create this system? The American system was designed to preserve freedom, and the Founding Fathers did so for the freedom of the American people. If we take the system itself as an absolute belief and choose to stand by and defend the system at the moment of survival while freedom is under attack, I think we are putting the cart before the horse. I believe that the Founding Fathers of the United States were to deal with this issue now, they would take the necessary steps to preserve freedom rather than preserving the system for the sake of preserving the system. In a tweet on January 4th, President Trump called the group of congressional Republicans who oppose the challenge results the Surrender Caucus. They are very weak and ineffective country defenders. Who is willing to accept such questionable election results? When you read this tweet, you really have to respect President Trump. Why does President Trump have so many supporters in the U.S.? He is still very clear-headed during this critical moment, as well as his American supporters. Currently, convoys of President Trump's supporters from across America have already been marching towards Washington, D.C. People are preparing for the January 6th rally and building momentum for the battle in Congress. President Trump also tweeted on January 3rd that he would also go to the rally on the 6th to show solidarity with everyone's actions. In addition, President Trump's supporters in Canada also decided to rally in front of the U.S. consulate in Toronto on January 6th to show their support for D.C. event. Ahead of time, on January 3rd, President Trump's supporters in Toronto held a pro-Trump car parade in front of the U.S. consulate. This is significant for a city outside of America, especially a city heavily influenced by the left. In the United States, there was also local pro-Trump rallies during the new year. For example, in Los Angeles, California, many of President Trump's supporters marched along the famous Rose Parade route on Pasadena, Colorado Boulevard. This January 1st event was an act of solidarity for efforts to uphold election integrity. With all the support, President Trump's team is gaining great momentum, while on the Biden side, we rarely hear any public support for him, even though he had a self-proclaimed victory. On the contrary, lots of bad news instead. On January 3rd, a reporter named John Nicosa for the U.S. news site Mediate obtained a copy of an email sent from the Presidential Inaugural Committee to the Congressional District Office of Military Affairs. The email states the inaugural parade on January 20th has been canceled. The viewing facilities placed on the north side of the White House had been dismantled on January 2nd. The inaugural parade is a ceremonial walk from the Capitol Hill to the White House after the swearing-in ceremony. It has been a tradition for new presidents for many years. The inaugural parade was also held after President Trump was sworn in on January 20th, 2017. On December 29th, leftist media also reported Biden's presidential inauguration luncheon was canceled because of the pandemic. December 2020, the inaugural committee urged the public to watch the ceremony at home during Biden's so-called inauguration to avoid gathering in groups. I think it would be best for Biden to announce his inauguration from his basement. It would be the safest place for the public. By the looks of things, Biden's so-called inauguration will be attended by the fewest number of spectators in the history. That is, if Biden appears on Capitol Hill on January 20th. Whether or not fate has arranged for Biden to be sworn in, it's not something that can happen with his own wishful thinking. As Biden uses the pandemic as an excuse for his strange inauguration preparations, there is no reasonable explanation for Kamala Harris's strange behavior. The first meeting by the U.S. Congress is hosted on Sunday, January 3rd. Almost every elected president and vice president have resigned around 10 days from the Congress after they got elected to prepare their term in the White House. This year, the governor of Kamala's state, California, has chosen a replacement for her position already. However, she did not resign and still appeared at the January 3rd new Congress meeting. This made her the first so-called vice presidential candidate in history who did not resign when new Congress began to convene. In other words, her actions has become a joke in American history. The other important agenda in the House of Representatives on the first day of the 117th Congress was the selection of the Speaker. Nancy Pelosi won re-election to the position on January 3rd with 216 votes, while her opponent, Kevin McCarthy, from the Republican Party received 209 votes, losing by 7 votes. Pelosi's 216 votes were less than the 218, the number for majority in the House. This shows the Democrats' lead has shrunk significantly after the election. While the Republican Party has taken advantage of public opinion and continually strengthened its forces, a very controversial speech occurred during the first day of the new Congress. The Democrat Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, who delivered the opening address, used the words "Amen" and "Woman" at the end of his speech. Amen is a Hebrew word often used in Western religions, which means "so it be," to agree or affirm. But the far leftists see the word men and created woman, a word that is not related to the original word to express gender equality. The former GOP House Speaker Newt Gingrich criticized that the radical madness has begun. There's also a very active far-left woman in the House of Representatives known as AOC, who is from New York State and has tweeted that sex work is work. Why do I mention her? Recently, Fox News reported that AOC dislikes Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, who is also from New York State. So AOC is looking into Schumer's position in the Senate. AOC has been reported in U.S. media planning to replace Schumer in the 2020 midterm elections. The madness from the leftists will act out even more as time prevails. It is really not easy being President Trump. Not only must he face the offensive forces from the left, but also deal with the threat from international enemies. In our last episode, we talked about Iran. We shared how the Iranian government had made threats against President Trump and U.S. government officials involved in killing Iran's number 2 commander, Qasem Soleimani. According to a December 3rd report from the Washington Times, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani allegedly said something even more outrageous against President Trump. He stated, and I quote, "In a few days, the life of this criminal will end." But the spokesman for the Foreign Ministry of the Islamic Republic of Iran rejected the report. Subsequently, on January 3rd, U.S. Acting Defense Secretary Christopher C. Miller ordered the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Nimitz to remain stationed in the Middle East to respond to Iran's recent threats, in light of Iran's provocation. It was initially scheduled to return at the end of December. The Chinese Communist Party, which is equally hostile to President Trump, has recently puzzled the world. Jack Ma, co-founder of Alibaba Group and a prominent Chinese businessman, has not appeared in public since the end of October last year. That was when he proposed an economic reform that contradicted Xi's administration. Rumors are now floating around that Ma is under CCP investigation and restricted from international travel, while others say Ma has quietly fled the country. On January 4th, a number of Western mainstream media outlets also reported that Ma has disappeared from the public eye. However, if it is true that he has absconded abroad and was willing to expose the corruption within the CCP, that would be a very serious blow to the Chinese Communist authorities. Next, I want to update everyone on the CCP virus and what's happening in China. I want to reassure everyone it's not for the reason of fear-mongering, but to keep an eye on it so that I can keep you informed with truthful information. We can't depend on mainstream news to provide truthful and accurate information. At present, the variant of the virus has appeared in different areas of mainland China. The pandemic continues to spread and is becoming increasingly serious. Some areas have entered war zone mode since January 3rd. The emergence of the super spreader is one of the signs that the outbreak is spreading over a large area. In addition to the doctor's warning in WeChat groups that the pandemic is very serious and spreading rapidly. There were also people who photographed a number of Chinese military vehicles for pandemic prevention and control driving into cities around the new year. This has led to a lot of discussion about how serious the epidemic is now that the Chinese Communist Party has sent its army into cities. As of January 4th, at least 20 districts in Shenyang have been infected with the virus. In Dalian City on January 3rd, there was also a video showing many buses and cars driving into community and pulling away infected residents. The doorway of residential buildings were covered with steel plates by epidemic control personnel. The Chinese Communist Party is controlling their people, not the virus. The origin of such a terrible virus has not been conclusively determined because of the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up, but U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor Matthew Pottinger said at a virtual conference last week with members of the Congress and politicians from 8 countries that there is a growing evidence that the laboratory is the most credible source of the virus. The virus probably came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, 18 kilometers from the Hunan seafood market, as a leak or an accident. Of course, there are many who believe that this was a biological weapon deliberately released by the Chinese Communist Party. In any case, all accounts now point to an evil organization, the Chinese Communist Party. Sooner or later, it will have to pay for all the crimes it has committed against mankind. Now that's it for today, my friends. Make sure to like and share, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.